If you don't know me, I'm Teddy, and I'm a videographer and founder of Capture My Culture Films. And in this series, I'm sharing everything I learned as a beginner videographer in hopes that it will inspire and motivate you if you're starting your videography journey. Now, here's a secret I'm gonna let you in on. All camera gear is relatively the same. Some have better features than others. However, technically, they have the same functions, right? And as a beginner videographer, I was often intimidated by the gear that other creators have accumulated over time. And truly though, these cinematographers started where I was and where you possibly are right now. So if you even have a phone, you can actually learn how to use the camera, and I'm going to prove it right now. So if you have a smartphone, I'd like you to download the Blackmagic camera app, and I'm going to walk you through the basic understanding of the camera operation. So when you open the Blackmagic app, right, here are a couple of the features, and we're gonna go over them one at a time. Basically, all the functions in the Blackmagic app is similar to what you would find on pretty much any DLSR camera. Cinema cameras have different, some cinema cameras have different, indications, but overall, they're gonna focus on the three methods of exposure, which is the exposure triangle, right? So to the upper left, you have the lens sizes. So I have an iPhone 16 Pro. So depending on the type of phone that you have, you'll have different options as far as lenses. The first one is the ultra wide. The second one is the wide lens, 24 millimeter. Then you have the 48. And then you have 120. All right, the next one is your frames per second. So usually the cinematic standard is 24 frames per second for that cinematic look. You can also shoot in 30 or 60, depending on what you're trying to shoot. If you're shooting slow motion, 60 would be ideal. But if you just wanted to be safe and still be able to shoot in a cinematic frame rate, you would do 30, and that gives you the option to slow it down in post, which I'll explain later. The next one is your shutter speed. So it's 180 shutter rule that you should go by when it comes to shooting. So if your frame rate is 30, it should be double as your shutter speed. So if you're shooting 60 right here, your shutter speed should technically be 1/120. And that's for you to get realistic motion blur. So if you're shooting with motion and you want to capture motion blur, that's the ideal frame rate that you want to shoot in. The next one is your actual aperture. And essentially, the lower your aperture, the better you would get depth of field shots, meaning shots where you have the blurry background. And then ISO is essentially your setting to fake essentially more light in your shot. So meanwhile, the shutter, if you lower your shutter speed, right, it brings more light into the shot and it brightens it up. If you're unable to change the shutter speed, right, if you're shooting at 60, you would have to leave it at, 1/120. You would use ISO to raise it. Now, some cameras, they have native ISO, which is an ISO setting where it shoots the best quality with the least amount of noise. Because as you shoot in darker scenarios, or as you shoot with a higher ISO, it will brighten the image, but it would also introduce noise, which if you don't want that look, it could make your footage look a little bit uncinematic. But like I said, creativity is subjective. So if you want grain in your videos, shoot with grain in your videos. Who cares? right? And then you have white balance. Now, literally what white balance is what in your shot is white. And if you shoot with a white balance that is off, essentially what happens is you're going to introduce colors into your shot that aren't actually there. So if you are shooting in a scenario where you're putting in your white balance, you'd want to find a subject that's white and try to get closest to that color. So here, your color balance is categorized. So your color balance is ranked in Kelvin. So 2500 Kelvin is more cooler. 1000 Kelvin is more warm, and 5600 is the color of natural sunlight. So depending on where you're shooting, you may have lighting that's more closer to the warmer side. You may have lighter that's more closer to a cooler side. The point of color balance is to essentially make whatever is white in your frame white. So this is the natural color of what I'm actually shooting. It's green in the background, and that white card is supposed to replicate true white. Now, if you hit auto white balance will select what they think is closest to the white. But generally speaking, if you're shooting a scene, you probably want to keep the white balance at that location the same color. You could always use auto just to double check, but ultimately you probably would want to leave it at manual, right? And then tint is sometimes there's a slight magenta or greenish tint where you're shooting, so you can tweak the tint if it's a little bit off. And all of these functions here are actually found in Premiere Pro. So if you miss the shot as far as auto balance, you can. So if you missed the shot in post when you were shooting the footage, you can bring it into Adobe Premiere and tweak the colors so that it matches white. The other functions here on the side is framing, so you could pick different functions and frames. I use rule of thirds, which is what I'm going to show you right now. When you're shooting in rule of thirds, you either want to have your subject in the middle, forming symmetry, or if they're facing a different direction, you want to give headroom. Over here is if you wanted to change different aspect ratios. Some cinematic videos have bars at the top to give it a specific look. And last but not least, you have different LUTs. So LUTs are lookup tables. You can input LUTs on this app to get a certain look. And essentially, LUTs are pretty much used to speed up the workflow. So as opposed to you color grading each shot specifically to what you want, pretty much LUTs are cheat codes when it comes to color grading, and it speeds up the process. Some people use LUTs to get a certain look. So they create a certain look and they save the preset so that when they're shooting certain types of scenes, they can recreate it. Others prefer to color grade on the spot using whatever the footage that they captured to have it look a certain type of way. However, LUTs you can input on this app to essentially allow you to get a preview of what a particular LUT would look like on specific footage. So as you progress in your videography journey, you may like a certain set of LUTs that you possibly purchased online, and that may be your look. Feel free, have at it. However, in standard profile, it's sometimes easier just to shoot with the natural or neutral color and then add dynamic range in post, which I'll show you in a video related to color grading. So this is the Canon R8, and like I said, a lot of the functions for most DLSR cameras or even cinema cameras are pretty similar. The only difference is where you find certain functions. I'm going to go over the same things I shared in the video for the Blackmagic app. So if you go to Q, which is usually the settings here, this is where you go to change most of the settings. If you start at the bottom here is your frame rate. So the frame rate we're going to be shooting at is 4K. You can do 60, you can do 30, or you can do the standard 23.976. For the sake of this tutorial, we're going to just do 30 frames per second, right? The next thing that we're going to look at is the white balance. Now, white balance is found on the upper right hand side on the Canon, and you can do auto white balance or you can pick a certain section. So as I showed you before, depending on your scenarios, there's presets. You can actually manually dial in the color by using this function here. Like I said, the easiest way to dial it in is essentially by tapping the auto feature in it, and it'll give you an idea of what's closest to white. And as you see, we have the card as the display. And on the bottom here is your shutter. So if we're shooting 30, it's going to be double the frame rate, so 60. And then the aperture on this lens is a 2.8, right? You could also get a prime lens. Some lenses go down to 2, 1.8, or 1.4. So I'll go over that in a later video on when you would use different apertures. But essentially, the lower the aperture, the better the blur that you would get when shooting certain subjects. And then, like I said, ISO is essentially what you use to introduce digital brightness. So depending on your scenario, you may be in a scenario where you might have to bump it up. It's not that much light. So you should make that decision on your own creatively. And here is the histogram, and how the histogram is shown is pretty much from left to right. So if you look at the actual shot here, as you can see, it's much brighter in the middle, which is supposed to be this card on the back of that mic there. And then right now we're shooting at 17 millimeter. Now this particular lens is designed for a crop censored camera. And this is a full frame camera. So even though it says 17 millimeters, the actual shot we're getting is close to 24 millimeters. And if I was to zoom in to 24, you see it changing. Close to 24, that's 25. That's more of a 35 millimeter shot. And then if you go to 50, that's more of a 65 to 70 millimeter shot. And if you decide to shoot, right now it's on autofocus, right? I think Canon has the best autofocus in the game. On the side of the lens, you switch it to manual, and in the middle you notice that it's highlighted yellow. That's pretty much telling me what is in focus right now. So if I was to change boom, you see, and that green light is indicating that it's currently in focus. Out of focus. In focus. There you go. So you should have a basic understanding of the exposure triangle. You can practice this for free with your phone before you invest in any camera. Don't let not having money prevent you learn the skill of videography. Between us, video production is a valuable asset to businesses and content creators. This need is only going to increase over time. So it's best you learn the skill now, invest in yourself, and believe in your ability to get better at this craft each and every day. Yes, there'll be doubt. There'll always be someone with a better rig than you who's booking high-paying clients. But the most important thing is that there is only one you, right? So find your style and follow your passion. Trust me, if you enjoy what you do, follow it, you'll definitely get paid for your craft. The next topic I'm going to be talking about in the next video is how to actually build a cinematic sequence from start to finish. Let's go.